Welcome everybody. I'm glad you're all here. I hope you're having a great SIGGRAPH. Let's get started. So my name is Brian Pohl. I'm the Epic Games Media and Entertainment Technical Account Manager for North America. Today we're going to discuss the impact that projects like the Fortnite Cinematic Trailer have had on the animation production pipeline. I see so many clients and so many people that are moving towards real time, but their excitement is always a little bit tempered by a little uncertainty and fear about trying to integrate a game engine into their production pipeline. But change is good. So today we're going to look at the ways that Epic is improving its tool sets for the animation production pipeline, and we'll move from there. If you haven't heard any of my lectures in the past, this might be a little bit of a repeat for you. I'm kind of basing it off of a lecture I gave in Montreal back in 2017. But for those of you who are arriving kind of to the real-time party a little late, we wrote a white paper very specifically about the Fortnite pipeline earlier this year, and this paper will give you a real good in-depth analysis of how the creative team constructed the original trailer. So it'll be good for you to download at any time. You can read it while you're walking around the show floor. So if you want to, snap a picture, and then that's the URL that'll take you directly to the paper. Okay, let's get started, and we're going to take a look at the Fortnite trailer. And we're going to, of course, run this in real time. Oops. Let's try that again. Oh, well, that's just going to give me a...
All right, people. Let's search this dump and get out of here ASAP.
Dump? What's wrong with the dirt burger?
Yeah, it's got everything. Garbage, rats, severe structural damage.
Some people just can't appreciate fine dining. Did you hear that? You got nothing to worry about. Trust me. I've got the heightened senses of a ninja.
Oh, I am so sorry.
Hey, it's okay. We're gonna get you out of here.
Oh, thank you. We thought you were more of those things.
The monsters are coming.
Looks like we're staying put.
Right.
All right, you two stick with me.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's get to work.
Let's head to the roof for evac.
Aside from the part where we almost died, that was amazing.
Hey, don't mention it. It's all in a night's work.
All right.
right, guys, who's up for pizza?
Oh yeah, pizza!
All right. Okay, so as you all know, that this particular trailer was constructed in Unreal Engine, and we're all working right now, as you can see, in real time. So we can move about. Let me go and start here at the beginning. Down here we have our sequencer, and as we start to play the individual shots, it's going to go through and start the process of being able to break everything down into specific sequences. So if we look inside of sequencer here, let's see here, we're going to go up here. We have our individual 6 sequences that construct this particular short film. And inside of each individual sequence, of course, we can go to each individual level sequence shot. And as we scrub through here, we can go to, say, maybe a very specific shot, and we can open this up and start to drill down into the specifics of each individual shot. We have the different cameras that are involved for this particular shot, which is, let's see here, right here. And we can undock the camera, of course, and move around within the scene, take a look at how to potentially reframe the shot from a different angle. If we don't like it, we can always move in a little closer. So let's see here, we'll get in a little tighter. And this particular real-time aspect is great for individual directors and cinematographers that are in the process of framing their shots. And we're going to get more into specifics about this in just a few minutes, but I just wanted to kind of show you a little bit inside the engine. So let's get back to here. All right, so the Fortnite Cinematic Trailer was a short film. It was consisting of 6 sequences that was assembled in UE4. It was a total of 130 individual shots, and it was mandated from the very beginning that it be performant at 24 frames per second. And pre-production, it started in August 2016, and the actual production launched in January 2017. All the work was built in Unreal Engine 4.16. It was a special custom version of the engine, and that seems like an eon ago. But the final product was delivered May of 2017 to synchronize with the game's release. The applications that we used for this particular trailer are all the usual suspects. We used Unreal, of course, to assemble everything. Autodesk DCC products, Max, Maya, Mobu for modeling, animation, motion capture, and a Premiere was used as the editing package. And then we had an additional number of secondary applications that helped us, like Substance for texture, Blenders was used for some of the destructive simulations, Shotgun, of course, for production management, Perforce for version control, and then we had Vicon for our motion capture volume, and FBX and Alembic were the file formats that we used. So anyone who's worked in animation or visual effects pre-game engine technology is familiar with the stages of production. We've got pre-production, production, and post-production. These phases all have different objectives to accomplish during the creative process, specifically by different budgetary and technological factors. Normally, what we see in traditional live-action film production is a single phase of production carrying the largest amount of technological requirements and the financial burden of the show. For live action, that burden is typically found in post-production, and I'm sure you've heard kind of the old adage, let's fix it in post, right? It's a common thing to hear. The problem with fix it in post and that mentality is by the time the production reaches post, it's saddled with all this enormous amount of creative decision debt from the previous phases. So this is particularly true of big, large tentpole movies where animated visual effects are instrumental to the show's look and feel. But ultimately, this debt can become really toxic to a film's production by delaying or altering the production during production design decisions, animation approvals, and editorial continuity problems that get introduced way at the end. So Let's see here. So there was an attempt in live action circles to balance this by the introduction of pre-visualization. And this was there to help better plan and predict potential costs and requirements of the pipeline early on. And this worked really well until films continued to increase in complexity. And that complexity is currently outpacing the benefits of traditional pre-visualization and kind of what we kind of think of as disposable previs. It's just too much. So combining this with all this competitive within the studio structure, we get this rush to the bottom kind of mentality where visual effects houses, animation studios, they have to do more with less, and it takes an impact not only on the visual effects house but on artists like you guys. So for an animated film, this is a little bit different. The picture is still complicated, but an animated studio has some advantages. Typically, they can concentrate all of their creative firepower, in a single phase, and it's usually during production. And live action films, they're not quite as lucky. They, while an animation house can have all of this under one roof, for a live action film production using animation, sometimes the scenes are broken apart across multiple VFX studios, which causes continuity issues and problems. And you can actually sometimes see a movie where multiple VFX houses have worked on it, and you can see differences in quality in between houses. So what we want to be able to do is, I want to be able to convey to you is that in animation production, that strength of being all under one house and having everything there is also, unfortunately, its weakness. There's a lot of extra steps in animation that you have to do in order to get a project off the ground. And the director has very limited influence on an animated film after it leaves pre-production. Yes, he does interface with layout supervisors and with the head of lighting and the head of layout, but these supervisors kind of take over that creative process. And the director doesn't quite get as much interaction as he should. Live action films, however, they'll of course have more of an interactive process with actors and working on stage during production. So the thought is, what if we could be able to offer that same kind of live action methodology in animation? Well, with real-time capabilities, that's becoming possible. And so the solution, I feel, lies in converting traditional pipelines over to game engine technology, where you can aggregate everything into a game engine like Unreal Engine. And that essentially means that you're creating what I'm kind of like coining the term nonlinear live action animation, okay? Now, is this really important? Is this the next step in animation? I want to show you some little bit of information. We commissioned this report called the Forrester, the Forrester report, that they did an examination of real-time rendering and what it means for the industry. And we paid for this to get the information, but we had nothing to do with how the information was collected and so forth. And this is some of the results, and this is really important for you guys that are in the production pipeline. 81% of firms are likely to adopt a game engine type technology in 12 months. Of that 81%, 59% says, hey, we're going to use it in production. And the stats continue to speak for themselves. 90% say that that'll improve their bottom line. And ultimately, this one is also a big one. 83% says real-time saves 25% costs over traditional means. So that's a big major factor. And if you are in the process of making an animated production, moving to real-time makes sense, not only from a creative standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint. We're going to later have a talk by Ryan Maeda at 2 o'clock this afternoon. He's also going to be talking about a lot of the virtual production tools and capabilities that also contribute towards the animation pipeline. So here's some guidelines that you should keep in mind when it comes to integrating real-time technologies into your pipeline. Number one, be ready to spread your financial resources across the entire production process, not just a single phase. Producers today are very, very trained to wait until the very end to spend their money. So if you have any say in the production pipeline, we need to spread those resources across all phases. Number two, you should be willing to triple or quadruple your pre-production resources for your virtual art department. And the thought about this is you should staff them with Unreal Engine specialists, shader experts, technical directors, and integration specialists. If you're waiting until production to do this, you're too late. Number three, create standards and practices focused around building real-time assets that are production ready, and you can start building them as early as possible. We're now starting to see in pre-production building production level assets that propagate through the entire pipeline. Create game libraries. Obviously, having a collection of these real-time assets are something that you could potentially reuse later, especially if you're using them for pre-visualization. And speaking of pre-visualization, we're going to talk about a first unit previs approach to creating rough layout. And that's where you're using a motion capture volume along with camera capture and live action actors to collect your data. Ultimately, know what your final deliverable is. If you're going to go for VFX to the silver screen, obviously that's going to be at a very high level. It's going to specifically dictate what you're going to need for your production. But if you're shooting for animation and television production, or maybe something for a mobile platform, this will change your requirements with inside of the game engine. So next is use Unreal Engine during your review and approval process. And that is something that is really unique. I worked as a previs supervisor in the film industry for like 17 years. And a lot of the problems that I would have would be interacting with the director, having him tell me his changes that he would like to see. Then my team would have to go back into Maya, construct everything, play blast everything, send it off to editorial. And by the time the director got to see it again, it was several days later, and it was out of his headspace. So the idea of being able to work and sit down behind the engine in real time to manipulate your shots, change your lighting, change your camera, and have the director and cinematographer give you immediate results, it's a huge benefit. Okay, let's take a look at the traditional animation pipeline. This is kind of what it looks like now. You've got a story department where you have story department, story reels, and storyboards that are created. This all feeds into editorial, and it also feeds into your production design process where the modeling is taking place, rigging, surfacing, and scene assembly. All of this is now being fed into kind of like the central hub of a traditional pipeline is the layout department. That layout usually consists of a rough layout department and a final layout department. Rough layout kind of does a lot of the preliminary blocking and so forth, and it sets up shots to be handed off to animation in order to insert performance. And once the performance is done, it comes back and gets dropped in to final layout, where they fix the cameras and push the shot forward into the enhancement phases, where you're doing crowds and character effects and sims and so forth, and then ultimately into lighting and rendering and out to final. In the Fortnite pipeline, this is slightly different. The team wanted to mimic a very traditional pipeline approach, but there are some obvious differences. Number one, we had a series of game assets that were already built for for Fortnite, and we were able to utilize that in our process. Everything that you see in purple there is what was replaced with the Unreal Engine. Okay, so we still have kind of a similar start. We start off in storyboards, we send them to editorial, they create a story reel, and it feeds with the game assets into a motion capture first unit previs phase that ultimately sends all that data into sequencer, in which we start to construct our sequence, all right? And ultimately, this process, we're gonna go over step by step, all right? So this gave us some really big advantages. It meant that we had models that were already built, we had game rigs for the games that were already built, and an animation library that we could access. And so this gave us kind of a big, huge head start over a traditional animation studio that would have to construct all of these assets by hand, and from the beginning. So the Fortnite pipeline was pretty good. It was solid, but there were some areas of improvement that we had to address and that we are about to address. So first off, the asset ingestion and metadata pipeline. First, bringing models into Unreal Engine, well, it was in earlier versions an incomplete experience. The scene hierarchy, the material conversion, and all of that didn't properly translate into the engine one-to-one. There had to be a lot of work constructed and done in order to make things look right in the engine after being imported. Secondly, there was no metadata pipeline, so there was no means or scripting tools to automate the input and output tasks within the engine. So everything is going in and out of the engine for that trailer manually, and that was a huge effort that constantly had to be done, and it took a lot of time. Next, the mocap pipeline, well, it was handled in Motion Builder, and that was good, and that's not so bad. But each take had to be reviewed, exported out of Mobu via FBX, imported back into Maya for validating the shot, and then exported to the engine, then placed into a level sequence, applied all that data to a character. Each one of these steps had to happen for every individual shot. So again, there's no form of automation there, very difficult. Sequencer was limited by a whole series of things that needed to be improved. We had no sense of frame accurate rendering, no time code. There was only basic EDL support between editorial and sequencer, and it turned out that ultimately we just had to manually conform shots between editorial and sequencer. So that was a long, laborious process too. Alembic was a godsend for us to be able to do all the facial animation, but it was all streamed into memory, and it limited the sizes of the individual shots that use Alembic. So, and then of course we also had some production management issues. We had no integration of shotgun inside of the engine, and so that had to be changed. So let's talk about pre-production on the actual trailer itself. It started off, in a very distinct story development phase where you would expect. There were storyboards that were constructed. These were all used to conceptualize different ideas, and they were cut together inside of Premiere Pro to give kind of a rough feeling of how the trailer should unfold. This mimics a very traditional approach, and that story reel was given as reference over to a Mocap and Previs team to do rough layout. This was all done with a Vicon system, and the idea was, let's record as much mocap in a single take as possible for each individual shot that we needed, and we would import that into the engine to review, and all of that we would build rough, loose level sequences inside of the engine to build this really large, fat master sequence. And then ultimately, the motion capture, if we needed extra one-off shots, we would go and capture them separately. And all of this data would be entered into Sequencer, in which we sliced and diced up the master sequence into individual shots that we could say, okay, this could consist of a shot, and this could be a potential shot. All of this had to be conformed inside of Sequencer. So all of these rough level sequences that we had built during the fast and quick mocap stage, all of that now had to be reviewed, and it had to be conformed and rebuilt so that all of the level sequences were proper. We had proper naming conventions and so forth, and all that data had to be entered into Shotgun to be tracked. It was at this point that the cinematic trailer branched off of the Fortnite main project. It was originally tied in with all of the Fortnite main in Perforce, so we created a separate branch, and it was going to be, let's start working on this individually. So that pre-production process, there's a number of improvements that have happened now since 4.16. Some of that is mocap improvements. As we can see, and probably you've seen out on the show floor, there's a number of live streaming solutions inside of the engine to Unreal through custom plugins. And Xsens, Faceware, OptiTrack, Rococo, they all offer solutions for bringing in motion capture data into the engine. If you need retargeting, we're still recommending that you retarget through Motion Builder or through iKinema. However, we've developed a live link Mobu plugin that will help stream data into the engine, and it can be located there on that particular link. Just go ahead and click it, and you can get it through GitHub. Now, we also are supporting new improvements to motion capture streaming directly into engine via live link. And so we do have some vendors that are supporting us on that now. We have Vicon, Dynamic XYZ, Cubic Motion, and Perception Neuron all have live link versions of the plugin, along with others that are expressing interest like Xens and OptiTrack. If you have specific questions, I highly recommend that you talk to these specific vendors, but the ability to get data directly into engine via your mocap solution is where we're heading. David Hibbets is going to have a talk at 12:30 right after my talk. I highly recommend that you stay for that. It's going to be going over all of this mocap tech. He's going to have a suit here, and it's going to be a great talk, so I recommend that you stay for that. So some of the other additional features that we've included since 4.16 to help your animation pipeline: ARKit 2.0 support. Okay, so here we've got an ability to potentially merge your CG graphics with live action footage. We have better, there's better tracking for this, and ultimately this could be great from a previs point of view of being able to use the engine with actual live action materials. We've also created a new virtual camera plugin, which is new for 420. Now this is a really awesome application. It's compatible with ARKit, Vive, and LiveLink, and ultimately it's integrated with Sequence Recorder, where you can control all of your individual custom aspect ratios. The focus controls are there inside of the app, and all of the replay controls are there. So you could use motion capture to capture all of the animation data from your previs and later shoot that data with your virtual camera using this particular plugin. So what's also nice is it allows you to save different waypoints, and you can move the camera position from automatically from one waypoint to the next, refocus, set your focus planes, do a number of features and capabilities that feed directly into Sequence Recorder, and then it will record that information of your camera movement and put it into your level sequence. Other improvements, we've improved frame accuracy, and we've added timecode integration into the engine. So this is very important. It's something that we've been missing for a while, and a lot of visual effects houses and a lot of virtual production capabilities are all saying, of course, you need render predictability, you need frame accuracy, and you need timecode integration. So this is now new inside of 420, and it's a part of a number of different virtual production tools that are coming to improve this process. Ryan will be talking about that. Ryan Maeda will be talking about that in his virtual production lecture. We've added media tracks. Now, media tracks is something you bring in an audio track, of course, inside your sequencer. Now you can bring in a media track, which is a series of images. It's an image sequence that can be loaded into the engine and played back in real time and synchronized, to your frame. So we've had a lot of call for this. And a lot of people can see it as potentially, adding and layering in, especially in previs, different, video clips that you might want to integrate. But if an image sequence isn't enough, we also have a media bundle, which is a series of tools in 420 that allows you to bring in a live video. And this is in combination with some hardware that you would have to acquire. Right now, we're using the Aja card, and we have plans for Blackmagic that you can use this in order to bring in video streams live into the engine. So this is a big major benefit. Again, and if you think about it from a virtual production solution and in previs, you could have live video streaming in with your motion capture data combined with your virtual camera, and you give yourself a number of ways to pre-visualize and conceptualize what your animation looks like. There's a new improved Final Cut Pro XML capability. Now this is going to basically allow your editorial department and your, the team that's working with Sequencer to be able to synchronize your shots between Sequencer and Final Cut Pro XML or any particular editing package that uses that specific format. So this is great. Your editors can go and shift and change around shots, save out that XML, bring it over to the Sequencer, and it will update Sequencer accordingly. So it's going to be this little animation clip here. That's basically what they're doing. They load that XML in, and it'll adjust everything over inside of the engine here. Okay, speaking of Sequence Recorder, this is an extra feature that's been added now that allows you to create groups and profiles of characters inside of your level sequence, and then you'll be able to record data onto those characters as you see fit. And this will simplify your previs and animation process by allowing you to record animation onto only the characters you need for the specific take that you want. And then there's a take selection capability so that you can switch between takes to whatever the director may want. I've had several instances in production where a director's like, I like take 1 of the animation of this character, but take 5 of the animation on this character. With the take recorder, you'll be able to make those selections for you and switch at will. So if you know directors, they may change their mind and say, go back to take 1, I like that better. So, and then of course, production management, big giant thing that we've included now inside of the engine. How many people use Shotgun? Okay. It's kind of like they say you've got to have it in order to have a production management solution. Well, now, I think this is supposed to play. So now you'll be able to use Shotgun and the loader to be able to basically search and browse for individual items to bring into the engine. It'll bring it into your outliner, or excuse me, into your content browser. I'm thinking Maya, sorry. And it will then allow you to place these objects into scene, in which ultimately you can then publish back out to Shotgun. So this will help integrate your process. Shotgun also will allow you to keep track of individual metadata that's being stored with the files, and grant you access to it from different tools. And we're working on better integration with Python and source control to tie this all into Shotgun so that you have a complete production management solution. Okay. So, as I mentioned, Brian's talk at 1:30, he's going to, this is something different. This is his Shotgun talk. That's going to be over at the booth. I encourage you to go and take a look at that as well. All right, moving into production. We've just been talking about pre-production. Production is something that goes even further. And we have a lot of you probably thinking, well, Brian, you had all those game assets for Fortnite. I don't have that in my pipeline. I have to start from scratch. What do you have for me? Okay. Well, of course, since 4.16, we've introduced Datasmith. This is one of the biggest improvements that we've made to the Unreal Asset Ingestion pipeline. This set of plugins allows users to import over 20 different CAD formats, converts them into Unreal seamlessly, preserving the hierarchy, preserving your layers. It converts all of the textures over, and it's one of the most, it's a great plugin application for bringing over static models. I've worked on a number of different films and previs, and one of the greatest challenges that I've experienced is bringing data in from conceptual designers that are in the art department, and they use every application on the planet, whether it's SketchUp or whether they're using Rhino or any of the number of different CAD applications. They're all building sets. This particular tool is instrumental for you to have in your pipeline to bring those sets in. And then it gives your production designers a chance to actually look at things in real time in 3D, along with even tools like City Engine. If you're building entire procedural cities inside of City Engine, you can bring those into Unreal as well. FBX has we're improving FBX capabilities with metadata so that you'll be able to create custom tags that will follow and survive the round tripping between Maya into Unreal Engine and back out of Unreal Engine into Maya if necessary. And that metadata can be accessible by Python and by Shotgun for specific things. Speaking of Python, Python has been added to Unreal Engine, and it's in our editor. It also integrates with blueprints and with source control, and ultimately, a lot of the problems that we experienced on the Fortnite pipeline of having to manually bring in data by hand, the process and reason why Shotgun was included was to improve those specific I/O functions and be able to automate that along with other tasks that you need to do inside of the engine. Now, I know many of you probably use Maya as your primary animation DCC. And Datasmith's a great tool, but it doesn't support animation or deformations or animation on the camera or on lights. So one of the things that we're looking into, and it's in the experimental phases right now, is Universal Scene Description, or USD. This is primarily, of course, used to help round-trip data between Maya into the engine and back, and preserving your scene assembly in such a way that it's a great tool potentially for layout. This is something that if you are in your studios working with USD, we want to hear from you, because we want to make the determination of what specific flavor of USD is out there and being used and what's important to you. So if you would, please get in contact with us if you are using USD in your pipeline. Okay, we've looked at these particular production improvements. We've got to get back into Fortnite and how things were constructed. So now, during production for the Fortnite trailer, they went in and created a number of sub-level organizations in order to organize their data not only by task, but by department. So there was a persistent level that we used to act as kind of like the primary scene container, and that holds all of those particular sub-levels. And we had sub-levels for the environment, we had sub-levels for characters and something to hold all the individual bodies that would reference the FBX bodies into each individual level sequence shot. There were cine levels and lighting sub-levels, etc. And all of them basically, of course, you'll see them over here underneath levels. You could go in and if I were to move out here, let's go up. Take a look at our city here. And we'll switch this over to unlit so that we can see it. Okay, so for the city, we had individual sub-levels that were broken down for eastern side of the city, northern far, south. Each one of these were different sub-levels to allow modelers and layout artists to work on those specific sections of the city and not interfere with other people working, of course, in the engine. And the whole point of using sub-levels is to divide your work so that your work can be accessed and utilized by your teammates without necessarily impacting other people working inside of the engine. All right, let's see here. We want this one. There we go. All right. Okay, so once those organizations were created, the team also had, there was a set blocking phase for layout. Everything that we did in previs, of course, was transferred into the engine and into sequencer, and we had to start prepping for our animation team in order to have them provide performance. So we would go out of the engine and export out simple geometry through FBX to give the animators something for reference so that they could animate to. And so we would export out, in certain cases, the Durburger or portions of the Durburger, depending upon what they needed. And this would then be, of course, used as reference for animation. All of the individual game assets that I told you about, yes, they were great for pre-production. However, for production, they weren't quite enough. They had to be enhanced and improved. So these were all imported into applications, into the DCCs. The heads and bodies were separated apart And then all of the models and textures were augmented with additional resolution if necessary, both geometry-wise and texture-wise. And all the baked lighting was stripped out of the textures because we were going to use dynamic lighting for the entire piece. So character rigging, also constructed in Maya. This was done with the art toolkit that was, at the time, it's still available on the marketplace. It's an auto rigging script inside of Maya to help rig up your characters. It's compatible through 4.17. However, the original programmer of this has a 2.0 version that he's going to be releasing on GitHub according to his blog. So Jeremy Ernst is the original programmer for this, and you should take a look at that if you're considering or requiring auto rigging tools inside of the inside of your DCC. But using the art tools, we added basically some extra leaf nodes on the body and for the FBX body for secondary animation purposes and to be affected by anim physics. And we also had to do an improved facial rig. As I mentioned, the bodies, of course, were separated. The bodies were FBX. They were about 110,000 triangles. The head, of course, was ultimately going to be an alembic cache that would be brought in and spawned into individual shots inside of the engine. So we had to break these two apart. The heads were about 70,000 triangles, so each individual character was about 185,000 triangles per hero character. So the game rig, this is the game rig, okay? And this only had 26 facial joints, and there was a limitation to the number of vertex influences in FBX back then. We could only have 8 influences per vertex. So this was kind of a limitation for our animation team. They wanted to be able to have better facial expressions to the character. So a new rig was constructed, and that rig contained 201 joints, one joint down at the base in order to attach it to the rest of the body once it was spawned into the shot. But this rig was basically, it was a combination of joints, blend shapes and lattices, all inside of Maya. And when it came time for export, all of that would be baked into a Alembic cache and sent out into the engine and imported into Unreal. So you can see that it's a lot, the face is smoother, the deformations are of higher quality, and the Alembic cache was instrumental for this particular process. I mentioned, of course, that's the art toolkit in action. All of this animation was outsourced by a team in Florida, Steamroller Studios, and they completed each individual shot, uploaded it online into a Box account for us, and we downloaded it to the Epic animation team, in which we would make final tweaks to their Maya animation and then export things out into the engine. All of this was tracked, of course. We needed to keep track of all of it, so we tracked it through Perforce. The facial performance, keyframed and exported as Alembic. The body performance, that was a combination of either game asset animation that we had from Fortnite, or it was mocap data that we used from the first unit previous process, or we used keyframing. It just depended upon the specific situation. All props were keyframed and exported as FBX, and all the destructive simulations were actually constructed in Blender for several of them and exported as Alembic files. Ultimately, we had a series of custom scripts inside of Maya that would bake out all this animation data and provide a folder that had all of our ABC files for the Alembic and a separate folder for the FBX files. Ultimately, you have to, from Alembic, you should also understand that your materials have to match between Maya and Unreal, and the material has to be applied to the specific geometry, not the overall mesh. So ultimately, when that gets exported, the face has to be, all the geometry has to be triangulated from quads, because most of, everything in Maya is quad-based mesh, and that mesh is then exported out as an Alembic cache and loaded into Unreal, in which it would be loaded into, it's converted into PCA compressed morph targets and then loaded into RAM. And then what we would do is spawn the individual heads per shot inside of the engine. There's a YouTube clip here from Epic that describes the whole Olympic pipeline. I really highly suggest, if you're interested in that, grab that clip so that you can watch that later. Okay, final layout and scene polishing. We're getting there. I know, there's a lot of steps. Ultimately, during final layout, all the shots would be examined and improved from a camera animation perspective. Of course, if there's any animation that needed to be tweaked, we do it now. If we had to go and make modifications to the character animation or potentially do something on that level, we would have to go back to Maya, of course, make the changes in animation and bring the data back in. However, ultimately, this is where we would do our final tuning and getting the shot to look correct. And then ultimately, there is a lighting pass. All the lights for this particular project were dynamic, and they chose dynamic lighting over baked lighting for a very specific reason, and that being interactivity with the director and cinematographer head of layout. The whole point here is you want to be able to shape your lighting and interact with these particular creatives in order to make the shot look the way that they want. So from a real-time approach, much more efficient. We used a series of either light rigs or spawnable lights in each individual shot, and ultimately we could prioritize the lights based off of whether it was sequence lighting or shot lighting. And if you work with this, the priority overrides can override the overall sequence lighting for the individual shots without changing things. So you could have a specific setup of a light rig inside of the sequence and then go into an individual shot, make changes to your lighting, and return back to its previous state without any problems. For improvements in this particular phase, this isn't really for pipeline, but we have improved our depth of field capabilities. It's good for cinematography improvements. It's faster. It supports alpha channel. It works across multiple platforms, and it gives you a very cinematic depth of field over some of the original traditional slower depth of field calculations inside of Unreal. We now have rectangular angular area lights. Again, good for cinematographers who are trying to shape the light inside the scene. They're like spotlights, and point lights, but of course you can change the width and height of the individual area that's being affected. And they're good, but they're a little costly. They are going to have to, if you're going to use them dynamically and calculate shadows, they're a little bit, a little more costly on performance, but they're very beneficial from a lighting perspective. We've had a number of different digital humans that we've worked on since 4.16. We've had Meet Mike. You've probably seen Siren. All of the technologies that have been developed through that, improved subsurface scattering, all of the skin textures, eyes, and so forth. All of that tech is now becoming available to be used inside of the engine. That's what's really cool about Epic. All of that money gets pumped back into the engine for features for you guys to use. We've also included back in, I think, 4.19, physical light units. And again, for heads of lighting, this is kind of important. And traditional cinematographers, they always get somewhat annoyed about this unitless values for increasing your lights. How many units does this change? Well, raise it up by 10. It makes no sense to them. So now you can start to track things by candelas or by lumens or other methods that are more familiar with people that actually do lighting for a living. Animation improvements. Who's heard of LiveLink? Okay. LiveLink is Epic's first and primary step of interfacing Maya with Unreal Engine. It's designed to transfer joint rotation and positional data between Unreal Engine and Maya, between Maya and Unreal Engine. That direction is what we're looking at. And ultimately, it acts kind of like a digital bridge between Maya and Unreal, so that you can have an animation control rig in Maya, animate that control rig, and the animation is transferred over to Unreal Engine, where you can view it in real time. We've also added, on the curve editor, we've added support for weighted tangents, and for animators, that's a big thing. A lot of them want to be able to improve animation quality so you can then break the tangents and change their weighting for better and more smoother animation. We've also added quaternion rotation to prevent gimbal lock and geometry flipping. So these are big things that help improve the quality of animation. There's now an experimental improvement to Alimbic in which we are improving how it streams in Unreal. It can now stream from the hard drive rather than having to load everything into RAM. This is better for better memory management and allows for larger scenes. So it's still in its experimental phase, and we know that there's some issues that have to be resolved. It's a little bit different of an approach, but if you are using the new Alimbic importer, please tell us about your experience so that we can continue to improve it. Variable animation instances. This is another helpful tool in animation and previs where you can combine this through blueprints to basically set up specific animation instances to keyframe on your characters. So if you have a walk cycle, a run cycle, etc., instead of adding all these individual tracks, you can now just keyframe between these and have that set up. So it's just a little extra improvement for speed. We also have an animation retarget manager. This is basically helping you to keep track of retargeting specific skeletons and geometry. And ultimately, there's also a series of third-party plugins and tools that you should be aware of. If you are using Maya, you can quick rig a character inside of Maya, and that could be used as your control rig. There's also I mentioned the art version 1 that's that's currently in the marketplace, and version 2, which you can find online. PyStage is another interesting application, another bridging tool, pipeline tool between Maya and Unreal Engine. All-Right Rig, that's an actual, I just talked to the individual programmer, and it's now compatible with 4.20. It allows for forward and IK keying inside of the engine itself. So if you want to actually animate in the engine, you have a full IK system there. Real Illusion, iClone, Character Creator. These are also other packages that do support Unreal Engine for creating characters and manipulating motion capture data. Good ones to take a look at as well. Wrong direction. Okay, Post. I'm not going to go deep into Post for this particular talk. I have very little time left remaining. So with post-production, there was a series of tools that were used to create the volumetric clouds and lighting, and all of this kind of technology is making its way into the engine. However, I, again, have a YouTube clip for you to take a look at where Ryan Brooks discusses this particular process of using these particular capabilities in the engine. Highly recommended. The guy's brilliant, and it has a lot of really cool information about this particular process. For rendering and editorial during Fortnite, they used Adobe Premiere. It was a very manual method of exchanging, and conforming between the two pipelines. Again, with the Final Cut Pro XML new capabilities, that's going to help improve for round-tripping your data. And we're bringing out Niagara, which is a new, this is now in 420. It's a new particle system. Again, early access, has a whole new UI, and has some very interesting ways of handling what can be used as an emitter, so you can have arbitrary data inputs, which can dictate what kind of things emit what kind of particles. There's programmable custom modules, and it has the ability to switch between rendering off of the CPU or GPU, depending upon which is better for your specific instance. It's going to help improve your effects in post-production. All right, so here's our pipeline. If we look at all these new changes and stuff, it would probably look something like this. It's still kind of traditional, but it's something like this. You have your story department, goes into editorial and story reel, but the story reel feeds into sequencer, and it also starts your production design and asset construction phases. You would then output from the DCC and export those assets and construct your scene assembly inside of Unreal Engine. rather than doing your scene assembly inside of something like Maya. Right now you would use FBX to do that data exchange, but again, this is where we want to talk to you about USD, about how this might help you in this particular process. But ultimately, that scene assembly would be fed into your blocking and rough layout phase, that they could use that to construct your first unit previs and also feed that data into Sequencer, where it all will, again, get reconformed and get prepped and all of your level sequences constructed. And then, again, it ties in with your asset export, goes into animation, they provide the performance, and it comes back into the engine again. So everything that's purple is Unreal, everything that's teal, that's a traditional process. And then ultimately it goes into your shot enhancement phase and so forth. All right, so I'm gonna skip this particular slide because I wanna have some questions. We still have 5 minutes in here. So who's got some questions? We have this. Can you catch?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Is the dynamic light too heavy to handle by I don't know, like a high-end gamer domestic computer?
To have dynamic lights, do you
Yeah.
need to have a really powerful computer, is what you're asking?
Yeah, but I mean a powerful but domestic one, like not because the trailer the lighting looks amazing, and I'm just wondering if that's possible, or you need like a really big computer.
No, you don't need obviously, I would recommend something like, a Xenon-based processor or high-end i7 or i9, equip it with about 32 gigs or 64 gigs of RAM. And I'd recommend a card like a 1080 or 1080 Ti would probably be my first choice. And of course, all of the Quadro 6000 cards are fine as well. And that's what this particular machine has. And that's, and I was running the engine in real time, as you saw. So I think that's all you really need. Okay? Who's next? Here.
Okay.
You got it?
Very useful.
Can you catch? No. Okay, we're going to throw it to you by somebody else, and they'll catch it. All right.
Thank you. I would try, but someone would end up getting hit in the head. I have a question about the. I have a question about the separated head and
Yes.
body rigs. Did you have any issues as far as getting the animation to line up between the two?
No, not really. I mean, there was, the Alimbic cache also had a joint that was located at the base of the neck that would align up with a specific joint at the top of the body, so that when everything was exported, there was specific joint data for that down at the base of the head, so that when we spawned in the Alimbic cache for each individual shot, that joint would line up with the rest of the body, and the head and the body would align.
Okay. And when you did you ever have to separate the head out as far as having the head at world, and then doing all the, because we're doing tests with it right now, and
Oh,
we're
okay.
finding that there's issues having both of them line up unless we separate out the head and have the head at the origin, do everything there, and then snap it back
Okay.
in Unreal.
Let's talk separately on that. and
Yes.
We'll see if we can get you lined up with some of our animation guys.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
Good. Ryan Maeda, everyone.
I feel like it'll be a lot. Oh, man.
I have a question about the live link.
Yes.
Is it a one-way live link, or is it a both-way where if things change in the engine, it would update in the Maya as well?
Right now, it's a one-directional capability from Maya to Unreal. So you make changes in your DCC, and the rotational data is transmitted via IP over into the engine, and then you'll see the updates happen. So David Hibbett's, his talk right after mine on Mocap, he's going to also touch a lot on LiveLink. So if you have some specific questions for him, you could talk to him then. I know that there's a lot of requirements that I hear from clients about being able to have this be bidirectional, and this is something that we're still working on figuring out, along with the whole USD equation and so forth. So I'd say at this particular stage, it's one directional as far as I know.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Kinema live action. Will that be replaceable by what you're building inside the engine?
Well, what part? Are you talking about being able to do all the motion capture and so forth, or?
Yeah, well, say to stream in 6-point rigid bodies and get nicely solved animations for, say, VR, real-time VR, full character animation.
I would say it's not going to replace yet. And again, this is a great question for David Hibbets in the next talk, because he's going to go over all of this pipeline, all of the motion capture pipeline specifically. And I would reserve that question for him if you're going to be here. If not, I'll introduce you to him so that you can answer that. Any other questions?
Yeah, have you seen any issues if you actually tried using like full body Alembic caches?
It's totally possible. There were actually a couple of shots in the trailer that full body Olympics were required.
Is there any tips like outside of those YouTube videos? Because I've seen like half the YouTube video and I've read the entire white paper.
Okay.
But we've done exports and we've had like issues with Alembic that we have no idea how to fix.
All right, let's talk.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, another question. The master sequence that you use for sequencer, is that locked to one map or can you jump between maps?
I can't answer that one. I know that right now that they've created a master persistent level map, and inside of that there are the individual level sequences that define to the sequences. I think that they saved out separate maps for other things, but I'd have to take a look for you. I can't answer it off the top of my head.
Okay.
Sorry.
Hey, I was just curious in terms of, for a lot of the productions I've worked on and colleagues, as fun as it would be to finish the whole thing in Unreal, we'd probably have to take it back out to Katana, RenderMan, custom renderers. Are there hooks or are there plans to be able to export other things apart from meshes, like say, light positions as an indication of style or whatever other metadata we could get out of like a nicely finished previous post-viz?
Yes. I mean, right now, the virtual production effort that we have going on within Epic, Brian is working with a series of customers and clients that are doing that, in which there has to be a full bidirectional pipeline of being able to manipulate data, both and get it in and out of the engine. So my answer to that would be yes. Ryan, do you have anything specific to add on that?
I mean, like that's like we'll touch on it in some of these other talks, but it's something that we're optimistic about USD, and so that's something that we're working on. That's going to be coming in basically the next release before, and for this use case in particular, we're interested in talking to people on specifically how they expect those things to go through, how they expect to get stuff back. We're kind of at a point where we have like a base layer of functionality that we need to start drilling into details on practical.
Cool.
Anything else? One more, and then that's it.
Going back to the animations and bringing those into Unreal, I saw you were in Maya, you animate them and bring them into Unreal. Did you have to use multiple versions of the level and send them back to animators to fit it so they were positioned the right way? Or were they put in towards the end after all the animations were made?
Well, essentially what happened is that there was a separate animation company. We had to supply them with all of the rigs. We had to supply them with all of the scene assemblies and blocking so that they had reference to animate to. They wound up with animating performance. They would send us the single Maya file back to us via a Box account. We would download that. We would load it into Maya here. If there was anything specific that had to be tweaked, our animation team would do the tweaking at that particular stage. We would output then the animation and export everything out via those scripts I mentioned and bring it all into Unreal Engine, both the bodies and the head. And then ultimately, if something had to be changed or modified, our animation team would make tweaks in Maya in order to make that change and then re-export the data again. So,
okay.
Yeah, The outside team was primarily there to provide all of the essences of the shot, the major primary set of animation, and then we would do modifications and tweaks as necessary.
Great, thank you.
Okay, if there's any other questions, we can talk about it outside. We have to kind of get set up for the next tech talk, but thank you for coming.